Chatham House, and I'm your host this afternoon. I'm very delighted to be having a conversation this afternoon, this evening, this morning, depending where you are, with Ambassador Dr Amina Mohamed, who is the Cabinet Secretary for Sports, Heritage and Culture in Kenya, which is the Kenyan equivalent of Minister. And as many of you know, she was the Kenyan Minister, Cabinet Secretary of Foreign Affairs and Trade, 2013 to 18. This is a conversation with Ambassador Amina Mohamed as part of a series that we're looking at of the candidates for to replace the Director General of the World Trade Organization. On the 31st of August 2020, Roberto Azevêdo will step down as DG of the World Trade Organization. The selection process for the next Director General is underway, with 8 candidates nominated by national governments around the world. Chatham House has now, with Amina Mohamed, will have hosted 3 of the candidates, and indeed next Monday, the 10th of August, at 12:15 British Summer Time, we will be hosting Liam Fox as another candidate. A couple of notices just about this meeting. It is a public meeting. It is being recorded. It is fully on the record. And when we come to the moment for Q&A, if you could type in your question in the Q&A box, I will then turn to you and choose some of the questions. If you want to ask that question that you've written out, please indicate so, and that will also assist me. So with the House rules out of the way, I'm delighted to be welcoming back Ambassador Amina Mohamed to Chatham House, because she spoke here last, in fact, on the stage where I am, in September 2016. She was then Kenya's Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs and Trade. So Ambassador Mohamed, I've got a few questions for you. And the first question I'd like to ask is, what is your overarching philosophy on global trade? And how does this influence your vision for the future role of the WTO?
Well, thank you, Dr. Vines. Thank you for having me back. I'm delighted to be back at Chatham House. Last time I came, I was told even then that I was on the record. But when I was invited, I thought I would have Chatham House rules. So, I'm really happy to be back, and I know that this is on the record. To your first question, Dr. Vines, you probably remember that the far-sighted post-war leaders in the 40s shaped a new economic order. And in so doing, they steered the world away from the aftermath of the Great Depression and the catastrophe of armed conflict. And they did that by ensuring that we would then move on to a path of growth going forward. The vision underpinning this architecture of international governance emphasized multilateral cooperation, which is something that I firmly and truly believe in. The period from the 1950s to the early years of the 21st century was one of unprecedented economic growth and development. Trade was a big part of that story. What I would say next is that at a personal level, at a very personal level, having worked at the WTO and having worked as a Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, I've seen the dynamism that global trade can have in empowering countries and communities to integrate into the international trading system. But we also have seen instances in the same years where countries did not possess capabilities to take advantage of the opportunities. And indeed, instances where certain countries have not abided by their multilateral obligations. The world economy has also changed. Trade rules have not. New developments in digital knowledge, the increase in the types of services which can be traded, pressures of environmental degradation and climate change make it absolutely necessary, if not critical, that we begin re-engaging as we did before in multilateral negotiations so that we're able to deal with these new challenges, including, of course, Dr. Vines, the pandemic. And so I brought a vision with me when I applied for this job, and to the vision of reform, of recovery, and of renewal. And a fourth one of results. If we're able to reform, if we're able to recover from the pandemic, and if we're able to renew the multilateral trading system, then we will get concrete results as we have done before.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Amina. So you've mentioned the pandemic. So let me ask you a question this way. The WTO is predicting a historical large fall in world trade volumes in 2020 and probably only a limited recovery next year. What are the most important steps that the organization needs to take in response to the economic crisis triggered by the pandemic, in your view?
Well, I think, first of all, that the WTO needs to do what it does best, which is to insist on transparency of measures that governments, members of the WTO take, when they are confronted with the pandemic. And what we saw at Dr. Vines in the beginning was that out of fear, members of the WTO decided to erect barriers. They imposed trade restrictive measures, and they made sure that they thought of their own domestic situations first before thinking of multilateral cooperation, which again was the overarching reason why the WTO was actually established, why GATT was established. And so they looked inward and started putting in place restrictive measures. So I think that the first thing the WTO would have to do is to make sure that the gateways of trade are open, and the WTO members continue to build on the work that they started to look at members' response to the COVID. In the Trade Policy Review Body, we actually have a transparency mechanism and that monitors measures that countries are putting in place in response to different things. It's a transparency mechanism. And this transparency function of the WTO is often overlooked. But in this pandemic, it has become incredibly important. It's become incredibly important to make sure that that transparency mechanism works well, so that we take notice of measures that have been put in place, and we remind members that their responsibility is to keep these gateways of trade open, and that if they put in place trade facilitative measures, in fact, we can get out of the pandemic, all of us together at the same time, without as much destruction as we would have if all of us went our own ways. We acted in isolation, we didn't collaborate, and there was no multilateral cooperation. So I think that the role of WTO is just to make sure that these gateways are completely open, and they stay open for the duration of the pandemic and after, to make sure that all the medicines, equipment that is required by countries to start dealing with this pandemic, that those are available to countries, and especially countries that do not manufacture these products, many of them being developing countries and least developed countries, but also small and vulnerable economies and small island states.
Thank you. I'm going to push one more question your way, which is a further pressing issue that I can see facing the WTO is the crisis in dispute settlement system. So how would you address this? It's clearly a very key issue.
In fact, I have always argued that the whole system, the WTO system, is a complete system, and that it begins with the initiation of discussions, to the negotiation of new rules, to a mechanism that would then address any disputes that arise out of these rules that were negotiated by members. And so if you take one piece out of the dispute settlement mechanism, which is a two-tier system, then you leave a gap. You leave a gap that needs to be very, very quickly filled. The WTO's dispute settlement system, it actually injects credibility, legitimacy, and effectiveness into the WTO, because it makes sure that the rules can be obeyed, and if they're not obeyed, then you have recourse to justice, as it were. And so not having the appellate body there because of concerns that some members have expressed. And by the way, it's not just one or two members, it's a number of members, and it's quite, it's quite broad. Support for the reform of the appellate body is quite broad. And therefore, we will need to start negotiating a reconstitution of the appellate body, because if we don't, then you'll see governments trying to put in place interim measures to address that gap, because the gap actually exists, and we need to be able to fill it. It was intended to be a system that was, like I said, complete, that had a two-tier dispute settlement arrangement, and therefore we need to make sure that system is put back in place. The way to do it is to get countries around the table. We have a dispute settlement understanding. It gives mandates to all the panels and the dispute and the appellate body. And so we need to look at the dispute settlement understanding, see where we fell off track, why the appellate body does not exist anymore. What did we do wrong? What happened with that mandate? See whether we can correct the wrong that may have been done by falling off track when it came to the implementation of that mandate, and using the mandate to deliver reports and decisions for the membership. And I think that members have already started doing this. They have proposals on the table. One of the proposals that is actually gaining some level of traction is a proposal by the chairman of the General Council, who was chairman of dispute settlement last year. And it's a proposal on how to reconstitute the appellate body by dealing with the concerns that were raised, correcting anything that was not supposed to happen and may have happened, and making sure that we put it on a track of stability, and that we do that transparently, including all the members in the discussion, so that nobody is left out of the conversation, and so that everybody agrees on how the appellate body would be reconstituted. So that's really critically important. We cannot do without an appellate body. We must have it back in place.
And I have one final question before going to Q&A, and to remind everybody that's listening that you can ask your question, type it into the Q&A box, and just say whether you want me to come and ask you to ask it verbally, or I will choose some to read out myself. But Dr. Amina, I've had a few WhatsApps from around the world when people found out I'm chairing this meeting. And what struck me, a number of people were saying, what would be where do you see the aid for trade agenda of WTO going? None of the other candidates have mentioned it so far. It is a WTO initiative. And given the importance of recovery post-COVID, where do you see this particular initiative fit in?
Well, I was here when aid for trade was actually negotiated and put in place. I think that the reason why we needed an initiative like that was because we realized that in order to fully integrate developing countries and least developed countries into the multilateral trading system, that we needed to support capacity building, that we needed to make sure that they had what it took to participate in trading, whether in terms of just procedures and policy formulation, whether it was in terms of addressing some of the supply side constraints they had, whether it was to deal with the standards of the products that they were producing. There are all these issues that needed to be carefully addressed, and there were no resources to do that. And so it was very important that we came up with a program that would then attract funding from the development partners, countries that were able to do that, make sure that we had the resources to support those that needed this support the most. And that obviously meant that they had vulnerable economies that needed that support. And I can tell you that it worked really, really well. One of the things that if I was selected to be a Director General, one of the things that I would do would be to make sure that I worked with other international organizations, and especially the financial ones, and to make sure that we could get resources. All of them have desks that deal with trade and support to countries that need to be supported to integrate, and would be able to coherently develop policies that would address the challenges that these countries face. Boost the aid for trade package, make sure that we have the resources to address the concerns of as many countries as possible. You can't integrate into the multilateral trading system if you cannot fix some of the problems that these countries are facing. And apart from the aid for trade, there was also obviously the integrated framework for LDCs. Yeah? Just consider this for a moment, that LDCs get access to markets across the world, and they do it on a duty-free, quota-free basis. But there's absolutely no way that they would get adequate access, right? Because of some of the measures that are included either in the rules of origin or in the standards that are expected of the goods that enter these markets. And without support, these countries won't be able to make it. So aid for trade, critical initiative, needs a lot of support, but has been extremely useful in addressing the concerns that developing countries and LDCs have to integrate into the multilateral trading system.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amina. We've got some questions now. I'm unclear of that any of them want to ask verbally, but I'm going to ask the people whether they want to ask it verbally. The first one on the list is Miles Wickstead. Miles, if we unmute you, please ask your question and do introduce yourself.
Hi there. So my name's Miles Wickstead. I'm a former British ambassador to Ethiopia, and I spent some happy years in Kenya running the regional development programs in East Africa. And the question I wanted, Dr. Amina, is to ask what role you think the Sustainable Development Goals might have in seeing WTO's work go forward. We are at a crucial moment where there is a risk of losing momentum, and I would just like to have your assurances that if appointed to that position, you would really get behind them and push them along. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I think that's an amazing question. Because honestly, if we are not able within the WTO, as we continue working on issues that fall within the mandate of the WTO, if we lose sight of the SDGs, then we won't be able to actually achieve the goals that we have set for ourselves. And I'll tell you that when I was in Nairobi chairing the ministerial conference, that was upmost in my mind. And that's why I insisted on getting a deal on the prohibition of export subsidies. Because I thought that way we would address the goal on ending hunger. It would make food more affordable, and we would allow farmers to be able to actually compete in their own markets, because then food that would be coming in would not have been subsidized, and they had a fair chance of improving their livelihoods and dealing with the whole hunger question. So in Nairobi, we were actually able to address very, very directly an SDG on ending hunger. Right now at the WTO, there are multilateral negotiations that are ongoing. There are negotiations on fisheries. If we are able, at the end of this year, to deliver a fisheries agreement, we would have actually ticked two boxes. One of trade and the other one of sustainability. Again, addressing one of the SDGs that we agreed on in New York. And as we go on, I think we'll be addressing them in any and all the negotiations that we undertake, whether it's on agriculture, with addressing domestic support and market access, or whether it's in any other areas, including the digital economy. We have a plurilateral right now on e-commerce, and I have been talking about how we must make sure that the benefits of that plurilateral agreement are actually shared on an MFN basis, on a most favored nation basis, with all members of the WTO, those that negotiated and those that didn't. By doing that, then you get broad support. You also help in addressing the digital divide. So those issues that are uppermost in my mind, even as I compete to be Director General of the WTO, hoping that we can have some coherence in the way that we deal with issues that are important to the international community, including, of course, climate change.
Indeed, the next question is one on climate change, and I wonder if she wants to ask it verbally. Mira Shah, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, sure. Yeah, thanks for having me on. You mentioned climate change very early on in your presentation. So as the head or the DG for WTO, how will you ensure that the institution leads on the climate emergency response, as opposed to simply responding to alternative threats? So, thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Mira. Look, at the WTO, we have a committee. First of all, let me backtrack a little bit and say that we have what we call the trade agenda, which is trade and other issues. And one of the issues is environment. So we have a trade and environment committee. And now that committee, when I was here and when it was actually established, did a lot of work on the environment. We even started working on a list of environmental goods and services. Since then it's kind of slowed down and hasn't done a lot of work. I think one of the things that I would do if I was selected to be Director General of WTO is to energize that committee, to get it to work. Look at the list that we had started developing a few years back of environmental goods and services, and just make sure that the list is still relevant to the issues that we're dealing with now, including response. And just make sure that we are participating in this global conversation on climate change and what needs to be done about it. But the WTO actually has a committee on trade and environment, and as I said, it just needs to be re-energized so that it can do what needs to be done and to participate in the global conversation that's taking place right now.
Great. Another question we have is from Mohamed Abdi Rahman. Mohamed, do you want to ask your question verbally, please? If not, I will read it out. Mohamed Abdi Rahman, are you still there? No? So Mohamed's question is the following, Dr. Amina. Oh, I can hear him. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me this opportunity. My name is Mohamed Abdi Rahman, and I'm from Somaliland, and currently I work with the Ministry of Trade. So my question to Amina is, what kind of strategy do you have to build again the trust and solidarity of world trade partners, which currently diminished due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as trade war between China and USA? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mohamed. That's a really good question. First of all, I would deal with some of the issues that are rising by making sure that, and some of the tensions that you're talking about arise because the rules are either weak or they're absent. And so one of the first things to do is to see how we can actually reform the organization to deal with the shortcomings that members have pointed out. And one of the shortcomings is basically the updating a rule book that members feel is outdated. And making sure that as you update the rule book, that you take into account the latest developments globally, including, of course, the pandemic, but not also digital revolution, as well as sustainable development. So upgrading that rule book is critically important because it will take care of all these issues, the old issues that need new rules, and new issues that also need new rules, but also weak rules that need to be strengthened. I also think that when you have reformed, you build on that to ensure that we can recover from this, from the pandemic, and also renew the organization and make sure that that the organization is actually fit for purpose. On the tensions, the reason why we need to look at the rules to sort out the tensions is because some of the reasons that have been given are that the rules are weak and that they're being circumvented. And so there's a need to look very, very closely at that. Look, I have no doubt in my mind that with goodwill, good faith negotiations, with the Director General, hopefully if I'm selected, who can both create the space for negotiations and for candid talks, but also offer good officers and be an honest broker and arbiter that will be able to start very, very gradually, incrementally dealing with some of the issues that are facing the organization today.
Thank you. We have a question from Ed Cropley from Reuters. Hello, Ed, nice to see you. Would you want to ask your question verbally? I think you're based in Nairobi too, if I remember right. Ed, would you like to ask a question or shall I read it out?
Hi.
Oh, good.
Hi, Alex.
Go ahead, Ed.
Hi, Dr. Mohamed. I'm Ed Cropley. I used to be the Reuters Africa Bureau Chief based in Johannesburg, but I'm now in the UK as a columnist for Reuters Breaking Views. My main question, it relates to the big source of paralysis in the WTO, which is the tension between the United States and China. How would you as WTO director convince either Donald Trump or his Democrat rival that multilateralism and a return to multilateralism is in US interests?
Well, I don't think that there's a doubt in anybody's mind that multilateral trade has been good for all of us. It's been a force of good. It has been transformational. We have a system in place today, I was talking to Dr. Vines about, and that was created after the Second World War, whose intention was to make sure that all trade disputes would be governed by rules and that we would avoid going into conflict because of the lack of governance in the multilateral trading system. So I have no doubt in my mind that all of us members of the WTO want the US and China to stay in the organization, to resolve any issues that there may be within the context of the WTO, within the framework of the WTO. And as I said just a few minutes ago, one of the reasons why you have these tensions is because the rules are weak in some cases and do not cover developments that have taken place, or the rules are absent and need to be negotiated. And so again, as I said before, we would need very, very quickly to put in place the conditions that are required, the environment that is needed to start building confidence among the members, so that they feel confident enough, and there's an environment of confidentiality where they can actually come in, candidly put the issues on the table, and resolve them. I was talking to friends of mine and told them that these are not the first tensions that we've seen in the multilateral trading system. We've had tensions before, even before China came in. We resolved them by making sure that the DG acted as an honest broker, that he convened meetings between and among countries that had reasons to meet and resolve tensions that existed, and that it was done, and we moved on. And I'm hoping that if selected, I would offer the same kind of service, good officers, create an environment, build the confidence that is required among the members, and start talking about these issues, putting them on the table and discussing them. We are not doing that right now. We need to start doing that. Right now, we're all talking at each other. We need to talk to each other and deal with this in a very honest and candid way. Trade issues can be resolved within the WTO. I have no doubt at all in my mind. They have been resolved before, and I'm sure in the future they'll continue to be resolved. And maybe in 10 years, it will be a different type of tension that will exist. And, so I'm very, very confident that if it's a trade issue, WTO is where it should be resolved. It has a dispute settlement mechanism. one that needs to be obviously fixed, but it has done amazing work before for the membership, and I think that it will continue to do that. And I would offer the good officers that are required to do that. I don't think that it's an issue of who's in office. I think if there are trade concerns, there will always be trade concerns, and they need to be addressed as such, as trade concerns that need rules to resolve.
Great, thank you very much. We have another question come in from Carlos Lopes. So Carlos, could you unmute yourself and ask Dr. Amina your question? Professor Lopes.
Thank you, Amina. It's a pleasure to ask you a question. I'm really worried about the Doha round not being anymore in the cards, according to certain members, influential members. And yet, this is a larger question about how we use trade as a means towards development rather than trade as an end on itself. So how do you intend to address such tension if you're elected DG?
Well, thank you very much, Carlos. It's so wonderful to hear you. First of all, I'm so happy to hear you. And to say that, yes, that has been a concern that's been raised by a number of countries. But look, this is what I would say, that the Doha round was launched in 2001. I was in Doha when the round was launched. And we worked really, really hard to launch the Doha round. It was also coming in the aftermath of 9/11, as you know, where we all needed as an international community to come together to show that we can work together and that we can achieve great things. And so we did. There was euphoria when we did that. We were really, really happy. And that even with all the doom and gloom that was happening, that we were able to achieve something that was really significant for the international community. Now, we all know that Doha, which was scheduled to end in 2005, remains unfinished. But what we did in Nairobi was to make sure that export subsidies, which was part of Doha, was actually resolved. Now, if we can resolve domestic support, we can resolve market access, we can conclude the fisheries agreement, then we would have taken care of a number of issues, number of items that we had in the Doha Declaration. And I think it then becomes an issue of substance and not form, of what are the items that we can deal with, how quickly can we deal with them, and how quickly can we realize the objectives that we set for ourselves in Doha. But I would argue that some of the items that we had in the declaration have already been attended to, and others have been resolved. Export subsidies is done. Fisheries is ongoing now. We have negotiations on fisheries that are ongoing. And I've been talking about the need to make sure that the other two pillars of the agriculture negotiations are restarted again. And with the expectation and the hope that if selected DG, then I would re-energize the domestic support negotiations to make that happen also at Kazakhstan during the ministerial meeting. If that happens, then of course those issues would have been taken care of: export subsidies, domestic support, fisheries if it's completed. Of course, with domestic support, you have the cotton issue, so that too would have been addressed. So finally, it just becomes, substance over form. Have we achieved the substance? And if we have, then we can move to dealing with other issues.
Good. Let's move to another question. And oops, my questions have just moved out of sequence. Yeah, Trudy Hartzenberg, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question, please? Trudy, are you there? If not, I will read it out.
Trudy is not there?
We're just seeing. Otherwise, I will ask the question. Okay, I'm going to read it out, which is, the question was, the Trade Facilitation Agreement is only new multilateral agreement concluded since the establishment of the WTO. What can we learn from this agreement?
Thanks so much, Alex.
Oh, okay, you're there, Trudy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Amina.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, hi, Trudy. Are you going to ask the question yourself?
It's good to hear you. And I think our experience with the Trade Facilitation Agreement has important lessons for us going forward in terms of negotiating further agreements. It focuses also, of course, on what we need to do to assist with effective implementation by LDCs in developing countries. What are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Well, I think that truly, thank you very much. It's wonderful to hear you. Let me just say that that's a new generation agreement. It's a new generation agreement because it deals with some of the issues that I think even Carlos was referring to in a new way. Basing some of the flexibilities and some of the concessions that are given to countries on a need basis, a need basis and not blanket. So that's a new generation agreement. I think it was very, very carefully crafted to just balance, rights and obligations, but make sure that countries that need it receive the support that they need to be able to basically facilitate trade within their borders, to make sure that their procedures and regulations are modernized and that many of them are digitized. So that it's just much more efficient for them to participate in international trade. So yes, it holds many lessons. Lessons of moving forward carefully, making sure that you're carrying all your members along, giving support to those that need it, and in a way monitoring whether that support is adequate. So it's an agreement that I think shows us what the way forward, what the future of multilateral negotiations will look like.
Thank you very much. I have a question from Nigeria. Again, sorry, I've just lost it. Here it is. Mohamed Adamu, could you ask your question, please? Mohamed Adamu. Otherwise, I will read it out. So Mohammed might not be with us, so I'm going to ask the question. And his question is, Dear Amina, is it too late for Africa to have a consensus candidate? Obviously referring to that there's an Egyptian candidate, a Nigerian candidate, and yourself.
Well, thank you so much. And I've answered that question, so many times recently. Look, I think that it's wonderful that Africa has put forward 3 highly qualified, candidates for this job. And one thing that it has done for us is to show just how much potential there is on our continent. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It also shows how much we want to contribute to the multilateral trading system. I think just recognizing how it has transformed our economies, that it has been a force for good, that is something that we must all participate in, and the need to be able to support our nascent Secretariat of the African Continental, Free Trade Agreement. So it's not a negative, Omaro. It's not a bad thing. I think it will not take away from an African leading the organization. I think the members, in their wisdom, will decide which one of the 8 candidates best suits, to do that job now. Because this is a critical time for the WTO. The WTO is at a crossroads. I think that the train of getting one candidate has left the station, frankly, because all of us have participated in the General Council debate. We have been interviewed. We have been discussing trade issues since then, but we have been also very supportive of each other, and basically talking about how important it is that Africa can make a contribution, finally, to the multilateral trading system, to trade governance globally, and that it has such competent candidates to put forward.
Thank you. I have a question from Julius Mabalatu. Julius, do you want to ask your question, please? We'll try and unmute you.
Yes, I will.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Dr. Amina, we wish you all the best. I think you are a very good candidate. And my question is that, what will you do to ensure there is, equality between nations when it comes to global trade. There's been like observations that most of the time the deals that are stricken, sometimes they don't end up being value for money, especially to African countries.
Well, thank you very, very much. There are 44 African members of the WTO. And we have 9 other African countries that are in the queue to accede. And I think that the reason that so many of us are here is because we know the importance of trade. We know the importance of trading at the multilateral level. We also know what that has done for our economies. We've been able to export much more efficiently, I think. We have used aid for trade to improve our systems, to modernize procedures, to harmonize policies. We have also now a continental free trade agreement that will allow us to have the biggest, not just market, but the biggest free trade area in the world. And we can learn a lot from the WTO. Our treaty is aligned to the WTO, and we can use the support that is in the WTO to ensure that we don't falter as we move along, using the lessons that we've learned here, the experiences that we have, the resources that the system can afford us, and to just make sure that we're moving ahead and we're moving ahead in the right manner. WTO and the multilateral trading system has not been bad for us. Otherwise, we would not have been lining up to join. We have also been able to start trade policy courses in our countries as a result of what the WTO has done. I remember myself being ambassador here and starting 2 trade policy courses, one for Anglophone Africa, the other one for Francophone Africa. It was 6 months long, which is about half of a master's degree, where we just taught our middle level officers about trade, introduced them to the agreements that existed, showed them how to benefit from trade. Because at the end of the day, listen, we negotiate, all of us together, all members negotiate. We accept the results of the negotiations on a principle of consensus. If there's no consensus, and we have stopped agreements being adopted because we felt that they did not respond to some of our issues, and we have gone back and renegotiated them. So you have actually an opportunity here to negotiate rights and obligations that you feel you can take on. The agreements provide you with special and differential treatment. They give you the space that you need, the policy space that you need to develop your infant industries. The rules allow you to do that. The rules allow you to have the kind of special treatment that nobody else has because of your level of development. And of course, as you graduate, things begin to change. And one of the things that we're discussing now, and I hope that we can get an agreement on it, is for when countries start graduating from LDC to developing. We're negotiating now so that those countries do not lose the benefits they enjoyed as LDCs for more than 3 years, because now they're allowed 3 years. We're negotiating for up to 10 years, which will mean that you continue enjoying all the market access, duty-free, quota-free, for another 10 years as you graduate from LDC to developing. You can't do that outside the system. You have to negotiate it within the system. The services waiver for LDCs, the amendment of the TRIPS agreement, which supported compulsory licensing and parallel importation of ARVs, in the main for Africa, by the way, because I negotiated it. After just seeing the devastation of HIV/AIDS, if we were not in the WTO, we would not have been able to negotiate that. So there are benefits. There are really direct benefits to belonging to the system, using the system to support your growth and your development, and using the special and differential treatment that is provided to developing countries to protect your infant industry. So I think I would rather have African countries in the system than outside, because here they get an opportunity to actually negotiate for themselves, and nothing is really imposed from above.
And that's an appropriate moment for us to finish. We are exactly on 18:01. So Dr. Amina Mohamed, thank you very much for spending the last 45 minutes with us on describing why you think you would make an excellent DG of the WTO. Thank you for taking all the questions. Thank you for the audience for staying with us for 45 minutes. And if you continue to want to follow this WTO candidate process, please join us next Monday, the 10th of August at 12:15 British Summer Time, when Dr. Liam Fox will be arguing why he should become the next DG of WTO. Amina, thank you very
Dr.
much.
Vance, we would be very, very happy to receive any questions that may not have been asked. They can be sent directly to us. We would be happy to respond to them in writing. But I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. And, I hope that I can ask for support through this forum so that anybody who's listening out there and who has the right to select the next Director General would think of me kindly as they went to the confessionals to talk about the preferences that they have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the time. Thank you, everybody, and have a good afternoon, evening, or morning, depending where you are. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Dr. Mike.